Hello everyone watching and welcome to my channel. I'm Bird's Eye View Politics and I take a bird's eye view look at things. In this video I'm going to be breaking down why Democrats probably have to have a little more caution and optimism about the current situation for their party in regards to the 2022 midterms. So on the screen, you can see the 538 polling averages. Currently, using the deluxe thing, which is where you add in the expert ratings, polls, fundraisings, past voting patterns, etc. So yeah, right now, Democrats are slightly favored to win the Senate, while Republicans are favored to win the House. And that's very different than just a few weeks ago when Republicans were supposed to destroy Democrats. Democrats are supposed to have zero chance of winning the House, and it was supposed to be maybe a 50-50 chance, possibly even leaning Republican in terms of who would win the Senate. And that's changed essentially since June 25th. Now, back in June 25th, Republicans were up by just over 2 points in the generic ballot averages, where you put a generic Republican against a generic Democrat. And that had roughly been the same since essentially the beginning of 2021, which is when, of course, Biden was pulling out of Afghanistan, gas prices started going up, inflation started going up, COVID came back a little bit. And Democrats, who until then had been leading by between 1 to 5 points, were down by around 2. And it roughly stayed that way. If you look at February 6th, for example, it's 2 points. By the time you get to April, still 2 points. All the way to June, it was roughly the same. It didn't really change. 2.5, 2 1/3, etc. It's roughly the same. Until June 25th, when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now, most people thought, yes, Democrats should gain some support because Democrats are more pro-choice and Republicans are more pro-life, especially now. And pro-choice, at least currently, is a significantly more popular position, especially among moderate, especially suburban women. And those are really one of the swing constituencies in our current environment. And Republicans lost that ballot advantage going down until roughly early August when Democrats originally took the lead until now where Democrats are up by roughly half a point. So this is why Democrats are going to win the Senate. Now, essentially, using the deluxe model, if you take a look, the swing 2 seats are going to be Georgia and Nevada, both currently Democratic-held seats. And most people would say, well, why is that? Democrats have 50 seats. Why would the 2 swing seats be Democrats? And it's very simple. It's because in my home state of Pennsylvania, one, John Fetterman is running a relatively good campaign despite having had a stroke. And two, Mehmet Oz is running an absolutely terrible campaign. If you look at the ads, Fetterman is winning basically everywhere in terms of how much he's spending, how much he's fundraising. Yeah, Fetterman is just running simply a better campaign. And additionally, regardless of how you see the two candidates policy-wise, Mehmet Oz hasn't campaigned on policies. Most of the ads he's running are attack ads saying that Fetterman, for example, will let people from jail out of jail. Whereas if you look at Fetterman's ads, they're attack ads, but not necessarily at Oz's positions because Oz hasn't really stated positions. His attack ads are much more about how Oz realistically is from New Jersey. I mean, he's lived in New Jersey. He's even voted in Turkey. So yeah, Oz is going to lose Pennsylvania, I think, by a decent margin. Now, this brings us to, well, why are Democrats supposed to win if, of course, they're only winning by a tiny bit in the generic ballot and the Senate is biased towards Republicans? And it's pretty simple. Most of the seats that are up are Republican. 21 seats that are up are Republican and 14 seats are Democrat. Additionally, most of the Democrat incumbents are staying on, at least for now, in the more swingish seats, whereas in the Republican seats such as Pennsylvania or North Carolina, they're retiring. And that means that you lose the incumbency advantage, which is very, very important. If we go into the light version or the what the polls base it on, Democrats have an even bigger chance, roughly 80% chance to win. And that's because in some states, Democrats quite simply nominated a very, very strong candidate, while the Republicans nominated weaker ones who haven't run. For example, in Ohio, where Tim Ryan is arguably the only Democrat who can possibly win Ohio's Senate election, while J.D. Vance is one of the only candidates who could possibly lose the Senate election in Ohio. And for the most part, polls have backed that up. It's pretty much been a swing race in what is increasingly a red Ohio. Additionally, in states like Iowa, we saw that the averages, Republicans are only up by a little bit. Now, in Iowa and Ohio, Republicans are notoriously underrepresented in most polls, at least in past cycles, and they significantly overperformed the polls. So I would still say Iowa is a safe seat. Ohio is probably still going to be a Republican, but it does mean if Republicans want to win Ohio, the National Republican Senatorial Committee is going to have to spend money in Ohio. It's a similar thing in North Carolina. North Carolina voted for Trump, but it was by an insanely small margin. It was roughly the same margin as Georgia or Arizona. And Democrats have started pulling ahead. Early polls had Budd, who is the Trump endorsed, more far right candidate, and Sherry Beasley, your more left wing Democrat, is running relatively even, with even the most recent polls saying so. And while I still think Republicans will come back to win North Carolina in the polls, clearly this means Republicans have to spend money in North Carolina, whereas North Carolina is definitely not a seat that Democrats have to win in order to hold the Senate, although they'd like to. Same story in Florida. Marco Rubio is a very strong candidate in Florida, which is increasingly voting red. But Val Demings is also increasingly looking like a potentially strong candidate for Democrats. Many Democrats thought Val Demings was the only one who could possibly win. I still think Val Demings has a horrendous chance of winning, but Val Demings has proved people wrong before in swing districts, and Demings has even started to tie the race after previously losing by landslides in most polls. There's some other seats that are going to be important, such as Utah. When Utah Democrats declined to run a candidate and instead put their support behind a conservative but an election supporter, Evan McMullen, who previously ran a very strong third party campaign. And most polls currently have Mike Lee, the Republican incumbent, polling just below 50%, with 38% saying they'll vote for McMullen and 12% saying they'd vote for some left wing candidate. But the Democrats aren't running a candidate, and it's very unlikely that these 12% of Utahns decide, yes, we're voting for the Green Party when you have a more conservative candidate, but someone who supports the election, who you are able to vote for. So I think that McMullen has a low chance, but it's some chance. Same story in Colorado. You've got either strong Democrats or, like in Arizona, you have both a strong Democrat and a very, very weak Republican challenger. Same story in Nevada. I think that Lex Salt, however, he's a little bit, I guess, underappreciated by Democrats. I think Democrats look at their incumbency advantage and they say, well, we've got this. And the polls somewhat back that up. But outside of this crazy poll, which definitely had some issues with it, where Cortez Masto was winning by 21 points, Cortez Masto has really only been winning by around 1 to 6 points, and Laxalt has even won a few polls. And the race is very, very close. If you actually go to the deluxe model, it's 58%. Classic has it at roughly 2/3, as does the light version. So everything says it's going to be close. I still think, though, Democrats probably win the Senate if they just don't have some crazy collapse out of nowhere. Now, the House, on the other hand, is a different story. While the light version, which is your poll version, has a 68% chance for Republicans, the deluxe version has an 80% chance. However, previously, Republicans had over 90% in this forecast. So why is that? Well, it's quite simple. In states like Texas, Republicans drew maps that essentially eliminated swing districts. This meant that in red wave years, Republicans couldn't capitalize on those swing districts the same way Democrats did in 2018. In Texas and Florida, they essentially did this by conceding certain districts that had just recently turned Democrat. For example, in the more Dallas area of the state, there's now the 32nd district, which had previously been Republican but is now Democratic. And that's never going to be competitive, at least in this decade, barring a crazy change in the electoral map. Now, it's a similar situation in other relatively red states. States like Ohio that redrew the map. They ensured that there would be two blue seats here, and they also tried essentially succeeded in ensuring that the ninth district would not be a very Republican district because they eliminated swing districts there. And we continue on. If you look at Florida, Florida probably could have had some more Republican districts, such as the 22nd. It could have been a swing district, the 14th swing district. Democrats probably could have emerged with only 6 districts if Republicans had made the most competitive districts available. However, Republicans instead just said, you know what, we're being a red state, and they have only 3 possibly competitive districts this cycle. Additionally, to make things even worse for Republicans, they have many, many, many states that essentially struck down gerrymanders. For example, in North Carolina, where the map they passed was extremely gerrymandered. This means now that Republicans only have 7 safe seats, and Democrats can expect to win at least 6. Whereas if they had made it more competitive and not something that could be called racially gerrymandered, Republicans could have done much better. In other states, such as Illinois or New Jersey, they were gerrymandered by Democrats, which essentially locked Republicans out of swing districts. And in others, like Michigan, that had previously had Republican gerrymanders, they got commissions that were nonpartisan. So that's essentially how it is. I still think Republicans will win the House. I mean, this current swing district is in Colorado right now, according to the polls, and Republicans are still up by 2 points there. However, as I've already said, that's in the deluxe version. If you just go off the polls, which are increasingly shifting towards Democrats ahead of Election Day, the swing district is only around 1 point off for Democrats. And I think that means that the Democrats should be cautious. They may not win the Senate. They may lose some governor seats. They may likely will lose the House. But there is some stuff to be hopeful for as the Democrats. As for the Republicans, if you're a Republican, then you should probably make sure that your neighbors know it's not going to be the red wave year that you thought it was approximately 3 or 4 months ago. It's now very much a close election, similar to 2020's, or some of the other close races, such as 2014. Additionally, due to gerrymandering in the House, you could even see Democrats win the popular vote and Republicans win the majority of seats. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.